So we have with us on the panel Hoz Shafiei, who's National Election Coordinator for the Workers' Party of Britain. I think you're standing 152 candidates, am I right?
I think it's down to 152 from 154.
Oh, I won't ask about the other two. William Clouston is leader of the Social Democratic Party, the SDP. You're on 122, I think, aren't
Correct,
you?
yep.
David Kurten, leader of the Heritage Party, 40-something?
41.
41. And Clive Heemskerk, who is National Chair of the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, TUSC.
Tusk for short.
Tusk.
And it's 40.
40. So... I want them to introduce themselves first, because one or two of the parties you may not have heard of. You've all heard of the Workers' Party of Britain. It's led by George Galloway. Hoz, tell us a little bit more about it. Is it a one-man band? That's the accusation.
It's got a very big leader. George Galloway is known pretty much for the last 50 years' worth of politics, so he does dominate a lot of it. But the core message of the whole of the group is socialism, and we've been around since 2019. It's not something that's just come off for this election or the last by-election, and it was a core group of people who are still in Birmingham, Manchester, which is where we started the party. And I would say that we've got people like Tim Pendry, who's a Cambridge, an old Cambridge man. He's a bit like Tony Benn. He's written our policy. He's written our manifesto. We've got people like Paul Cannon, Teddy, who've been in the party for years, and they are, old trade unionists. And they are, I would say, they're the core group of behind the party. But the face of the party is definitely George Galloway,
who was supposed to be here tonight but pulled out at the last minute. We're very grateful to you for stepping in.
And I'll just explain why he has done. In the last few days, as you well know, Keir Starmer has made some comments about the Bangladeshi community, and there's an event taking place tonight that is being held by Bangladeshi politicians who are standing for Parliament. George Galloway is also one of the people who's been invited to that event. So there's about 6 or 7 parliamentary candidates of Bangladeshi origin, and George is being asked to come and stand and speak at that as well. And I believe Andrew Feinstein is also going to be showing up as well.
OK. Clive, let's come to you, National Chair of Tusk. How do you differentiate yourself from your colleagues on the left here?
By the way, first of all, I'm the National Election Agent. Dave Nellist is the National Chair of Tusk. He's a former Labour MP. And actually, Tusk was formed in 2010 by Bob Crow, the former leader of the RMT, or then leader of the RMT.
Listen, I always found the most difficult man to interview ever, because he was always in a pub.
But I thought you were going to say
bad luck then.
I thought you were going to say because he was always absolutely intransigent, and that's
well, that too.
And that's his politics. And actually, the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition is what it says on the tin. It is a coalition of different organisations. Trade Unionists, the RMT union, was part of it for 10 years under Bob, and that continued until 2022. It involves a number of Trade Union National Executive Committee members and 3 or 4 different socialist organisations. And actually the Workers' Party does attend meetings as observers. So we've had coordination. We haven't had the greatest coordination possible for this election because it was a snap election.
Correct.
I think we were both thrown off.
So you're standing against each other in some seats?
In some seats, yes, because we weren't unable really to to coordinate it properly. But back, for example, I think it was actually on May the 15th, we had a list of different seats and we were discussing it in a very placid and friendly way, and then a week later, in the rain, Rishi Sunak.
William Clouston for the SDP. What's the SDP now compared to what? Because a lot of listeners will remember the SDP back in the old days, but you're rather different.
Not that different.
Same logo.
Well, not that different, actually. We still support PR. We want voting reform. We still advocate the social market economy. And largely, if you want to look at it this way, we traced the political journey of David Owen. So we supported Brexit. But actually, the left-leaning economics is the same. I suppose we're in a slightly different world now, aren't we, to 40 years ago. So there are changes. But the fundamentals, I think, are basically the same. We are to the left of the Labour Party on economics, which is not difficult at all. And we, well, it isn't, is it? And we are more socially conservative than the Tories, again, which is not difficult at all.
Define what you mean by that.
Well, we know what a woman is for a start. We have a lot of policy, a core part of our policy platform is defending the family, the foundation of society. And you'll find nothing at all in the Tory programme on that. We've got some interesting ideas on tax and housing to support the family. So yeah, I mean that's basically the offer. It's arguably the hidden gap in British politics, which people talk about. David Goodhart talks about it. Matt Goodwin talks about it a lot, which is lean a little bit to the left on economics, but be patriotic and socially, culturally traditional. So that's what we are: faith, flag, and family. And we
sounds a bit Trumpian.
Well, Trump's I wouldn't vote for Trump, but as someone said in the SDP the other day, right horse, wrong rider. I mean, some of his trade protectionism is actually spot on, because we need to reindustrialise. We'll probably talk about that tonight.
David Kurten for the Heritage Party. Now, I'm going to confess, I'd never heard of the Heritage Party until this election. So where does it come from? Because last time we spoke, you were a leading light in UKIP on the Greater London Assembly.
Yeah, I was. I was in UKIP back in the day fighting for Brexit, and obviously I put a lot of time in before the referendum in 2016, but then UKIP fell apart over the next 4 years, and then I left and I started the Heritage Party. And I really started it to be a socially conservative party because I didn't think there was one at the time in the UK. So we would stand for free speech, we would stand for traditional family values, national sovereignty, obviously Brexit, equality before the law, financial responsibility, and all kinds of other good things you can see in our manifesto in heritageparty.org if you want to look into that in more detail.
But all of those things you could have said if you were standing for the Reform UK Party.
I think there are some similarities and some differences. I mean, I started the Heritage Party in 2020 when the Brexit Party still existed. Reform didn't exist, and they had deactivated, so there was nothing going on. And then over the last 4 years, we've been on the different sides of everything. Like, we were against lockdowns in the beginning. We were against no jab, no job regulations for care home workers and doctors and nurses, which I thought were abhorrent. We supported de-escalation in Ukraine and a ceasefire in Gaza. And on all those positions, Reform have taken the opposite stance initially to the Heritage Party. And I would also say we are a specifically socially conservative party. So I ask my candidates if they to agree with certain things, that there are two sexes, there are not 79 genders, and that stuff shouldn't be taught to children in school. We have traditional family values, so we would say marriage is a man and a woman, and we're also a pro-life party. And I think people need the option to vote for a truly socially conservative party in this country.
Well, I suspect you might have provoked a few questions from our listeners with that little catalogue. Right, a text question here from Mick, who says, since the de-escalation in the Ukraine war has been mentioned, what is the panel stance on Russia, and how do we ensure de-escalation? Clive?
We totally opposed the invasion of Ukraine. We support the rights of Ukrainians to determine their own fate. We also support workers in Russia who are attempting to organise against Putin. But we also have to understand that Putin is a product of the West as well. In fact, without treading on too many toes, the Tory party should hand back the donations they got from Russian oligarchs, for example. And actually, by the way, Peter Mandelson, let's remember him, and he's links and liaison with Russian oligarchs as well. Putin was encouraged to integrate with the West, but only on the basis of their commodity production and so on. And frankly, it was a clash that was coming. We oppose totally the invasion of Ukraine, and the only solution, bluntly, is to build strong, united movements of workers across Eastern Europe to resist nationalist politicians who are perpetuating this terrible war.
David Kurten.
Well, I've spoken about this at length many times over the last 2 years, and you can't take what's happened in the last 2 years in isolation. This comes on the back of what the West did, the CIA and Victoria Nuland particularly, ousting a democratically elected president in 2014, Yanukovych, because he decided he didn't want to join NATO and he didn't want to join the EU, which is their right. What the West has done, the collective West, is put in a puppet in Poroshenko and then another puppet in Zelensky, and we've encouraged him to...
Well, Zelensky won an election.
He won an election in 2019 on the basis of peace with Russia, and he did a bait and switch at the behest of the deep state in the West, who basically controlled him.
You really have swallowed the Putin propaganda, haven't you?
It's not Putin's propaganda, it's actually reality, and it's actually what I'm talking about. So
it's a very strange reality.
Well, it is reality. I mean, you've just interrupted me there, so let me just finish and continue. So there was absolutely no need for the West to get involved in this on any side. We should have been trying to de-escalate from the beginning in February 2022.
So we should have just sat back and let Russia invade a sovereign country.
There was a peace deal in April 2022 that Putin and Zelensky worked out in Turkey with Erdogan. Boris Johnson went to Zelensky just after that, and the next thing we know, Zelensky had said, no, we're not going to make peace.
This is pure Putin propaganda. You should be ashamed of yourself.
It's actually what's happened. I'm not ashamed of myself, and I'm actually saying the reality of the situation.
How much land should we let Russia take then?
Well, if we had not gone in and agitated this and escalated and supported Zelensky to escalate, there wouldn't have been any land taken at all. Obviously, you had the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, who were Russian, who had been bombed by neo-Nazis attached to the Zelensky regime for 8 years. And
we might as well have Vladimir Putin sat where you are.
Well, I mean, that's just an insult.
You're an absolute disgrace.
That's an
absolute disgrace.
No, that's an absolute insult. And you can't
it was meant to be. It was meant to be.
You shouldn't call it. No, I'm sorry, I'm not going to have... You're not calling me a disgrace, and that is really not good moderation, because that
it may not be good moderation, but I'm just reflecting on what virtually every single person listening to this programme is saying. I want to hear from Hoz.
And we need to de-escalate.
You're not going to like what I've got to say, Ian.
Fine.
I'll tell you what it is. I agree with him almost 100% about everything.
Well, you don't surprise me at all.
Well, there you go. But the thing is this. A lot of people like to think to themselves that this is all Putin propaganda. It really isn't. This is reality. The fact is, we've got a mainstream media that's telling us how to think, how to do things. I am not a Putin apologist. I couldn't whatever about Putin, okay? But the point is, the people of Ukraine have been put in a position to be at war with Russia for no reason whatsoever.
Apart from the fact that Russia has invaded them.
Listen, Ian, they wanted peace, or they were told they're going to have peace, and they chose not. And the Americans and Boris Johnson and everything else have decided to carry on feeding money every single day to the Ukraine. Sorry, it's making a noise. To the Ukrainians, and all they're doing is trying to weaken Russia. So they think. All they're doing is money laundering money for weapons industry from the military-industrial complex. And anything else you want to say about it, for me, I'm 100% with him. And I'm not a Putin apologist. I'm actually a realist. The mainstream media want to make us feel like we're Putin apologists. We're not. We're looking at what's happened.
Okay,
all the time we're escalating,
David,
500,000 Ukrainians have died.
Clive.
We've got to stop that.
I thought you asked me first. You haven't asked William yet, but
sorry.
Well, I'm happy to take another bite. But you haven't asked William.
I'm so appalled by what he said. I must have forgotten your contribution.
I have a slightly different view. I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine was utterly reprehensible, and I think any nation-state democrat has to stand with Ukraine in this. Basics, absolute basics. I think the West is in an awful position because 85% of the population of the world is represented by states that don't take this seriously at all and is trading with Russia without any problem at all. That's the difficulty we've got. Really, the people that are standing with Ukraine in this, which you describe as sort of nation-state democrats and so on, are Canada, the United States, the EU, South Korea, Japan. It's not, the rest of the world is taking all the fungible assets, all the oil, and that's the problem. Now, in terms of I don't want this conflict escalated. I've argued, one or two Tory MPs were arguing for the RAF to intercept Russian aircraft inside Ukraine. I'm against that sort of escalation. I think that's very foolish.
But how do you de-escalate it? That was a question.
The sad thing is, Ian, I have doubts as to whether Russia can be beaten. That's the problem. And I think I fear the worst, actually, for Ukraine. I think it'll go on until Russia decides to stop. And I think, actually, the other thing that people don't think about, but actually partition is very common in conflicts after armistice. I mean, it's not just the history of...
But Ukraine is already partitioned.
I know it is, and that's the de facto... Yeah, and you won't... And the old Kissinger thing, you won't get back at the peace talks what you don't have on the ground. That's a sad thing. It's an absolute disaster.
Can I just add one thing? That my personal opinion on Keir Starmer is this, and George Galloway said it, and I'll say it again. I think within 6 months, if he gets the majority that he gets, we're going to end up with British troops on the ground in the Ukraine, because we've got a media that's feeding us how we should go and save this, save that.
I'm against that. I think
we need to make sure that our troops don't end up going into a hot war zone, okay, for other people.
Do you think if that was going to happen, it would have happened already?
No, it's going to happen when he ends up with when he gets a 400-seat majority. He'll turn and go, I've got the mandate of the people to do whatever I want, including getting our troops. I mean, he's already got 900 troops in Estonia or somewhere else in those places, and I can't see them not doing that.
A lot of people are experts on what
Tony Blair
Starmer's
Part
going to do.
Two. Tony Blair Part Two.
Seriously, I'm a bit staggered, really, because we seem to be forgetting nobody or no ordinary person in the Ukraine or in Russia benefits 1 inch from this war. That's the reality.
I agree.
That's true.
That's the Russian speakers in Ukraine who were discriminated against under the Ukrainian regime are not being. Are not enjoying life in the Donetsk provinces or in Crimea now. Let's be blunt about it. And the reality is that it's hard to see a way forward, except there is war weariness. Russia, if it has another round of conscription, there'll be more opposition there. There's opposition now growing in Ukraine against the war as well. And we have to rely ultimately on the people of the two countries saying enough is enough. It sounds optimistic or utopian, but frankly, this is a war that has no benefit for ordinary people.
Well, we're agreed on one thing, Clive. We're agreed on one thing.
Well, I'll tell you one thing our listeners seem to be agreed on, judging, and I'm scrolling through all these texts here, which Hoz can see, but the other three can't, if he wants to see. It doesn't make very good reading for you or David.
That's
People
fine.
are absolutely appalled by what you've both said.
Absolutely does not bother me in the least.
We will move on to a different subject.
I'm a gay man and I live in the Red Wall. This weekend saw the end of Pride Month, and London celebrated Pride, and we've still got Manchester Pride to go. Now, I've seen a lot of anti-LGBT rhetoric this general election campaign. Do the panel agree with me that Pride is still very necessary in 2024? And do the panel also support the pro-LGBT pieces of legislation we've had since the millennium, such as the Gender Recognition Act, also gay marriage, and the abolition of Section 28. And lastly, I wanted to say that a traditional family doesn't exist in 2024. There's lots of young children out there who have gay parents, 2 dads, 2 mums. They even have trans relatives. So I'd like the panel to consider that as well, please.
Right, and I'm going to ask for brief answers. Now, William and David, you said in your opening remarks that you were both parties that believe in so-called family values. How do you answer Paul, William?
Well, Britain's undergone a great liberalisation. I think we're there. I think you could probably find a hateful rhetoric if you look for it, but most gay people I know are pretty happy in this society. We're a tolerant society, thank goodness.
But you wouldn't want to reverse any of the pieces of legislation that Paul
I don't think
to.
Not at all. What we're keen on is speaking up for mum and dad looking after the kids. You hardly get a look in, actually. There's no.
But what about mum and mum or dad?
Oh
and
yeah,
dad?
of course. I mean, families come in all shapes and sizes, but we've got to be honest about the data on this as well. I think governments have been far too indifferent to family breakdown, and on the data now, a British 16-year-old is more likely to have a screen in their bedroom than the father in the house. Now, all of the quantitative social science supports the reality that kids are better off with their parents there, and I think less pressure on wages, less pressure on housing would have better outcomes.
David?
Yeah, I think people are fed up of LGBT and the LGBT ideology being forced on them through mainstream
What
media
is this
and culture
ideology?
all over the place. Well, we've got the gender ideology where children are taught that they're not boys and girls sometimes, that they can choose their gender out of 79 different things, which is absolute nonsense because there is no such thing as gender, which is different to biological sex. You're either a boy or a girl, a man or a woman. And this comprehensive sexuality
How do you account
education,
for bisexual?
which is, you're either a man or a woman, you know. So what,
but you can be a man who likes sleeping with men and women.
That's an activity. I'm talking about the sex, the anatomy that you are. So in gender, you're either a man or a woman. That's sexual orientation you're talking about. But again, teaching children this kind of thing in comprehensive sexuality education undermines traditional family values. And the best model of a family is a mother and a father who stay together, they're married, and they bring up their own kids. And that's what children should be taught as traditional family values. And I would, all that legislation that you've spoken about is all legislation that is a sort of a progression of LGBT ideology. You've got one thing and another and another.
Would you
and
reverse the
another,
Gay Adoption Act?
Yeah, absolutely, because children should not be given for adoption with
don't
homosexual
think
couples. They should be
That's
put up
wrong.
for
Why
adoption
not?
That's wrong. That's wrong.
Because a man and a woman who are married is the best model of a family,
No,
and
it
children
isn't.
have better outcomes.
What about
on every
No, it
level,
isn't.
if you
on
have a
every measurement
child who,
when they're put
if you have a
placed with-
child who
I
is
haven't
in
finished,
care,
sorry, I haven't
I
finished.
don't
You've
care whether you're
interrupted.
finished or not.
Their
It's my
children
job
have
to
a better
interrupt you when you're
outcome.
talking rubbish.
Well, I'm not talking rubbish because this is
What
this
happens?
Is,
What
every single
happens?
study that's been shown
David,
shows that children
I'll
have
cut your
better
microphone if you
outcomes
don't shut up.
in general with a man and a woman who are
No,
married.
David,
in a
no,
family.
David, you're wrong.
And so
Right,
that's
go on.
why.
David, you're wrong. Can I just say why?
I'm not wrong.
You are 100%
Well,
wrong.
we do agree on
Okay,
something.
we'll
You're
agree
wrong.
to disagree.
You're
Let's-
entitled to-
please,
you're
will you
entitled to-
please
you're
let the panel
entitled
speak?
to your own opinion.
okay.
You're entitled to have
Let's
your
agree
own
to
opinion.
disagree.
David,
All right,
no,
David.
I'll ask you to leave the studio in a second. You're
Well,
making
you know,
a complete fool of
well,
yourself.
let them have a go.
You
Let them
can.
have a go.
Let's agree to disagree on that.
Yeah.
I've got friends who are gay, two men who are friends of mine, and they've got two kids. Their kids are really rounded, don't have a problem in life, and they have loving parents. Both of them are men. His name's Mark. He's a good friend of mine, and I can't have you say that that's not normal or it's not nice or it's not right or this, that, and the other. You're wrong, my friend. Accept it, because from my personal experience, okay, from what I've seen, gay couples do bring up kids that are normal. There is nothing wrong with that. And
I'm not saying there's no
you are.
exception
You've
to
said that.
the bell curve, but in general,
Forget about the bell curve. It's just not.
in
okay.
general,
well, I've made my
children
point.
do better in all kinds of
How
measurements.
can you say that?
Well,
Do
but
you know every child?
All studies that are there show that this is the
Okay,
case.
well, I can't agree with you.
The problem is that the bigger issue. I mean, we have gay
man.
marriage, and it's not going to be reversed. It's fine. The bigger
But
issue.
it would
is-
be if David had his.
Well, I don't agree with it. The point is that the family stability for most kids is mum and dad, and they're splitting up in vast numbers, and that's stressful for them. It's bad for mum and it's bad for dad. It's probably, in terms of the fact that women mostly have to pick up the pieces, it's one of the biggest causes of poverty.
What about gay people splitting up and breaking a family?
I agree, but I'm talking.
They don't break up as much as those kind of couples.
I'm talking about the biggest problem, and I don't think there's enough state.
Well, the biggest problem is that we have about 70,000 children in care. But all I would say to you, David, is would you not think it would be better for one of those children to be brought up, even if you believe, as you do, that children are best brought up by a man and a woman, would you not think that it would be better for those children to be brought up by a gay couple who will give them a loving home rather than being in care for the rest of their childhood?
Well, when you talk about care, often that's foster care, so they're placed with the family.
I'm talking about
and I think
permanent care.
People who are in homes. And so, the best model is that they are placed with married mothers and fathers.
Fine,
And I think there are enough of them.
I accept that you believe
I think
that,
there are
but do you
enough of them around.
Do you just object to the principle of children being placed with gay parents because you think they're going to be abused by gay people?
Children should be placed where possible, and actually all the time, with married mothers and fathers. I think there are enough of them around. And what's happened...
Well, there
with,
clearly
with
aren't,
some of
otherwise
these,
they would be.
Well, a lot of the Catholic adoption agencies, when this gay adoption legislation were brought in, were forced to close. And that is terrible. I would allow them to reopen, and then there will be enough married mothers
Clive.
and fathers in order to take up the slack in the system.
Well, going back to Paul, I think I hope you're not too alarmed by the tone of some of the comments in this debate, frankly. But the reality is that Tusk does not support any retreat. It doesn't support repeal of the acts you mentioned, Gender Recognition Act. We do support the abolition of Section 28. And it does come back to a point I made earlier. Unfortunately, there is a tendency, and it's not just the Heritage Party. There is a tendency now amongst Suella Braverman, Kemi Badenoch are examples of it, of trying to use so-called culture war issues to divide and rule, and we have to resist that.
Can I just come in with a very practical thing which we may agree with on this panel? So the SDP has a policy of full sharing of tax allowances between couples raising children. They don't have to be married, just mum and dad, or could be dad and dad, raising kids, and they can fully share the tax allowances. That means they could literally earn over 25 grand, wouldn't pay any tax at all. That's a practical thing. I promise you, if that was implemented, it would cost about 5 billion quid. If that was implemented, that would result in less pressure on parents raising children and fewer marriage breakups. That's a sensible proposal, which we should all support, shouldn't we?
Well, that is Heritage Party policy as well. We would do that for married mothers and fathers. They would share the 100% married couples' income tax allowance completely.
And abolish the two-child cap. The two-child cap. For child benefit, would you do that? Is that your policy as well? What about proper funding for child mental health, which is in crisis? In fact, the whole adult and children's social care system is in complete crisis. It needs funds, it needs investment, that needs public spending, that means finding the money. And I come back to my points. We're in an unequal society where we have to change relations in order to solve these problems.